So Amanda talked a lot, and I'm sure got your minds buzzing about what you can do with your or for your customers. So this next section is about turning ideas into action, getting things started, then pushing them through and getting those things done. Mark Townley is Chief Customer Officer at AzuPay, pioneering Australian fintech, delivering fast, safe, smart, real-time payments for government, banks, billers and businesses. He's spent over 25 years in banking, senior leadership positions in several leading financial service organisations, 3 years as head of payments and cash management for ANZ. In 2013, Mark co-founded, has been managing director of Ideas to Outcomes, ideas to actually getting something done, management consultancy offering leadership strategy and transformation advice for businesses. Last 7 years has been co-founder, investor and director in 3 startups. So Mark will talk for a bit, then be joined by Kieran McKenna, Chief Risk Officer at Cuscal, for a chat. But we'll begin with Mark. Please make him very welcome.
Thanks, James, for the intro, and thanks to Cuscal for a great event already. I'm just going to minds going with all the ideas and thinking about strategy for 2020 and 2030, and Cuscal being a great supporter of us at AzuPay and what we're trying to do in our business. It's interesting when you think about 2020, 2030 strategy, if you and your businesses. We're also looking at what are this week's numbers, what's next month's numbers, what's next quarter, so it's half. What are we doing today? How do we plan for what we need to do today, and how do we plan for what we need to do tomorrow? And so what I've put together today is sort of 15 minutes, sort of some slides and some frameworks. I've used these in some of the major organisations. I've been leading programs. I've sort of tested them consulting with some smaller business, some fintechs, and they've sort of stood the test of time. So I think they're kind of relevant. One of the key areas is this view of, what looks easy is not quite so easy. So I don't know if you've sort of heard this or said this to yourself, and this sort of came from some feedback, typically from some graduate sort of project groups within the banks, that the world could be solved on PowerPoint. It's just when people got involved, it all got a bit harder. So what happens, what goes on in that interaction between strategy and execution? So really 4 things to take away, and I'm sure the slides will be shared around sort of some frameworks, which I think, so 3D, 4C, 5P, 6S. So I think you can remember 3, 4, 5, 6. And I think if you want to remember the letters, do come prepared to succeed. So there you go, you can walk away with that in your mind. So, and I think if you just look at what was being discussed this morning, your mind goes, wow, okay, how do we bring that back to what is most important today? What do I need to be doing in my business, with our customers, with our teams, with our people? And Einstein's sort of quote there you can see around how do I synthesize that into being able to explain that relatively simply, but not dumbing it down too much, right? These are important, complex topics, and there's a great degree of complexity that goes behind them. But often, how do you communicate that, particularly within organisations? I come also from the concept of, I've been running these programs in large organisations, also been fintech sort of pitching to large organisations. So how do you deal with the multiple stakeholders that are required to execute on these projects or ideas or initiatives? How do you get on board as an impaneled supplier? And I think questions around the pace of government movement and why do things sort of seem to take so long? And I'll just explore on a few of those things. So let's start with 3 Ds. Desirability, doability and do nothing. And I raised these with you in terms of you sort of stuck in the wallowing of information and all the stuff that's coming at you. Kind of bringing it back to these ideas helps to really synthesize some questions. And I think whether I've sat in front of CEOs or a project team member, please explain to me on these concepts and I think we can proceed going well, right? There's also 2 dimensions. So a lot of these concepts that I'll talk to you about, there's the company, your organisational dimension on desirability, right? How important is this for us to do, really? What does it really mean for us to do? And then customer desirability, right? Is it a great idea that we've thought up? We think customers will love it. They probably don't understand it all yet. We have to educate them. It'll be this education journey. And how desirable is it for a customer? And I think if you then separate product from need, or what is the problem you're ultimately solving for the customer, how desirable it is to solve their pain point, it's probably a better way to put it. And then what's your organisational fit to that? Doability. So, great, love the idea, great concept. Thinking about your organisation, your team, your capacity, your resources, your technology. Where does this fit on your doability scale at the moment? Is this project now number 64 on a list? How do I get it up to 15? Do I bump off 50 and 52 to do this? How do I get to number 1? I'm sure, I won't name the airlines, various airlines are having some sort of meetings around what their strategy is at the moment, re-looking at what they need to be doing in the moment, as well as what they're looking to do next year. So just think about that in terms of the questions. The first thing I typically ask is, okay, tell me about the customer desirability for this. Tell me about the organisation. How much does your organisation want and need to do this? You can even take that down to the personal level. So people working on the projects, how much do you really want this to succeed? Because I think that will be an energy which comes through in these programs about, something that's marginal tends to get lost in the wash. The 4 C's. Now, this is probably a little bit sort of the banking frameworks that we used in sort of looking at how we evaluate business cases in some of the banking projects. But again, I've seen it sort of applied across businesses of all types. Number 1, right, customer experience. We've all talked about, and fantastic sort of talks this morning around the importance of the customer experience, and that's both a rational, intellectual journey as well as an emotional journey. So that customer experience of what you stand for with the customers. Capital. Now, there's 2 aspects. There's resource capital. Right? Do we have the funding and the resources to do this? There's financial capital, but it's also about return on capital. Because I think, in sort of financial services, you certainly get taught about return on capital, which is how can I maximise the return for the resources that I have. And you'll see lots of sort of organisations knowing when is it right to exit a business or exit an idea, because I need that capital to go into a better or newer or another idea. So constantly thinking about the return on the resources that you've got deployed. And that evolves because it's not easy to change the train. If the train's going down the track, it's like, I want to change a carriage in the middle of a train, a freight train. Well, I've got to separate the train, I've got to move, I've got to put this new thing in the middle. It's not quite easy to stop inertia in a program of projects. So thinking about how do I adjust when I need to pivot, or what was it, pirouette, I think is the new word. Costs, costs benefit, right? What's this sort of going to cost? Return on costs in terms of what does it do in terms of how we fund this project. I've had a number of discussions with various kind of fintechs, maybe saying, I don't think you're spending enough in a particular area, and you need to be mindful of your costs because, the worst thing you want to do is kind of run out of money when you're doing these great ideas. And how do you really think about the cost of actually delivering it? And I always say, in project delivery, in my experience, the biggest cost in change and transformation is the time cost. It's not often the product or the tech or the product that you bought or implementing. It's the time cost of delivery, and especially the time cost when you have to remediate. So be really kind of thinking about that burn rate cost. That introduces the concept of, I talked about this train. Well, how quickly could you change a carriage in a train that you've got running? As a freight train that's going to take a year and a half to stop and I can't move it? Or is it a model train set? I switch off electricity, I pull that out and I put that one in to move it. So just think about that sort of concept. And in compliance, and I think we can all operate in the world today without compliance, right? So I know these conversations when we talk with even customers pitching our own solutions, what does this mean for risk and compliance in the market? So there's kind of four C questions to look at. The other one I see in a lot of the business cases that get presented is because of one set of numbers, and I used to have a CEO that said, that's great, now can you double the costs and halve the benefits and recalculate it and bring it back? How does it look now in terms of doing that? And then also in degrees of confidence. So equally in business cases where you've put numbers against things, which is all reasonable. And of course, a lot of innovation and fintech is, well, this is our best estimate, best guesstimate, but here's the logic that we've got to that, and there's a confidence level around that. As you get more knowledge, in particular area, you get more confidence that that can actually be delivered. And to be honest, in terms of, so look, are we unsure? Are we sort of taking an exploratory gamble or exploratory process on this? Or are we, the business impact is a lot, it's quite significant, it's quite confident. And then within your organisation, really, I think quickly figuring out kind of where you are at the moment. I call this line of appetite. Honestly, we've got this to do. Unless you are highly confident it's something that needs to be dealt with, you've come up with an absolutely smashing new idea. How do we do this? And the challenge, I keep coming back to this sort of train set analogy, it often comes down to your ability to be able to sort of stop or to pivot or change what you're doing now and drop in new ideas and so forth. So this agile organisations that many are talking about is easier said than done, I know that, because there's an inertia that gets built up with the programs of work that you've got going. And 5 Ps. So the next question I typically ask, sort of around projects and project teams. All right, tell me about the product, right? So it's pretty clear, what does the product do? Describe your product, in 30 seconds or less is always a great way to do it. So if you have to sort of take 2 minutes to explain to me what it is, or the next bit, how it works, process, it just sounds a little complicated, right? So be really crisp and clear on your process. The next one around, people, right? So two aspects of people again, right? Tell me about the impact on people, customers, right? So what does this product and process do for your people, customers, and what does this product do for your people in your organisation mean for you? Are they excited about it? Do they see this as, here's another project we've got to do this year? What does it actually mean for the impact on your people and how you think about prioritising this? Which takes me to the next point around priorities. And I would often, we call it the investment slate within the bank. You have all these list of projects: mandatory, strategic, regulatory, discretionary, innovative, exploratory, and they're all great ideas, great projects. And the phrase I used to use was, it's all about relative priority. So what's relative, situationally relative right now to what we need to do? How do you get this up on relative priority to what else is going on? So one of the things, if you're sort of pitching to an organisation or in a sort of enterprise sales, which is where I've spent a lot of my career, not only know about your product, your process, and what you can offer for the company or your customer, but understand potentially where does your project sit, or your idea or your product sit in their relative priorities. Is it high, medium, low, interesting, must do? So kind of thinking about that. And then, of course, kind of politics, right? We cannot avoid people-based organisations. We're definitely seeing the emergence of AI and technology into operational processes, but fundamentally, most organisations still now strongly driven by people. With that comes a political dimension. That's politics at the organisational level. That can be politics at the executive level. It can be politics at the individual level. Just being mindful of what sort of political environment is this organisation? I mean, can you just imagine sitting down with a certain CEO of an airline and just saying, hey, tell me about your product. we have seats on planes. They'd probably start with, no, we unite families and send you on your holiday journey. Right? No, I just want a seat on the plane that gets there, right, at the moment. Right? Tell me about your process. Oh, we pack bags, we do food, this stuff. Tell me about your people. Wow, can you imagine that conversation? Tell me about your customers. Not only that, tell me about your staff within the organisation who are dealing with customers on the front line, because your processes are perhaps 2017. And I put it on LinkedIn as well. I didn't name the airline because we do business with some of the airlines. So you're looking at, what is it that overbooking was the question. So this was a flight, and she said, "Oh, I can't put you on the seat tomorrow because we've also got overbooking issues." I thought, you're kidding me. You're cancelling every third flight and you're still overbooking flights, to put people over. What, you think someone's going to voluntarily get off when the line can't even meet the door? So it's like, and then you think about, well, where does this now sit, Mrs. Airline CEO, in your priorities? Because think about what you're trying to offer at the top. And then let's not get into sort of politics. Oh, it's not us, it's the regulators, it's the unions, it's the baggage handlers, it's the staff, it's everyone else but us. It's the customers. Oh, they're not travel savvy anymore. Oh, right, that's probably not the best and easy answer. So yeah, think about those kind of 5 Ps in that, how you pitch within your own organisation and how you pitch potential customers or buyers of your products and services. And then sort of 6S, and we spent a bit of time on this thing. As you pay guys will be sick of me talking about BTROPs, because I think, and if you look about the business stakeholders, we sort of have a terminology we call the pathway to close, right? When you think we've got a great idea, great product, right? It's only half about that. It's actually about what's the pathway to get this sold, signed, implemented, and who actually are the key decision makers in that process. And who's your champion within there? And you could start anywhere in these grey boxes, but you'll have to sort of move around and cover those areas. So business. And now people have sort of said to me, "Well, sort of technology is the business now." So I'm using sort of business as a sales marketing function, but really, I say to anyone, when you're sort of thinking about selling a product, if you're doing a pitch to another company or a customer, or particularly sort of large organisations, there is going to be a question raised by every one of these areas: shared services, finance, legal, sort of HR. As I said, do come prepared to succeed. Be prepared for what the ops. This is great. So what happens when they ring a help desk? Who's trained our people on the product? What happens in technology remediation? Finance funding. Oh, this is great. Done all this work. We've just realised we don't have funding to this until second quarter 2024. So just kind of thinking about where does this sit, and then how do you influence those stakeholders? Clearly in understanding the individual and understanding what drives them. So not only looking at the process, but mapping out the people in the organisations that you're talking to about getting stuff done. Now you might think, actually, this applies equally in my own organisation about getting stuff done, right? So I know, I've got to go to so-and-so and have this conversation and get this up the priority queue and get it sort of done. And then thinking about, are they a person that responds to logical appeals? Hey, we spend X, we'll get Y. If we do X, we'll get Y. Emotional appeals. This is absolutely what we're about as a company. The reason we want to do this, because it's absolutely our brand and what we're all about. And I think we'll be seen in the market for that. And then the cooperative appeals. Hey, I've got this really great idea, but Samantha, this is not going to succeed without your expertise. I can't do this. And we've got, we need to sort of find the support. So thinking about mapping out those sort of stakeholders in your own organisation, thinking about what motivates them to drive it. Just quickly finish on the sort of last 4. Then when you've mapped out those people, think, well, do I have your active support? Do I have your passive? Yes, okay, sounds good, and so forth. Do I have active resistance? Now, I actually like active resistance because you know what you're dealing with. The hardest one to deal with is passive resistance. Not that I don't like it, it's just, so how do you sort of either take passive resistance into active resistance or take passive resistance and sort of active support. So I hope those sort of couple of frameworks, you can kind of really think about just in terms of the projects you're working on, projects you're prioritising, getting stuff done, and particularly if it does involve your interaction with other, within the organisation and other companies and other customers. These are definitely the questions, in my experience, will be asked in that journey. So I hope that was a sort of quite useful sort of summary, and I'll invite Kieran. I think we're going to deep dive on a few more of these topics. So, Kieran.
Can I just point out for those Cuscal people in the room that when you come to see risk, we're always accommodating. And I think Sean, our CFO's over there, he's always accommodating as well. So don't let Mark...
I couldn't do this without you, Kieran.
Yeah, no. Now, I found on that little session we did before, we were sharing what you do and what your background is, I found out you worked with our chair, who I think has got a meeting outside, but you used to work with Elizabeth ANZ, was it?
I did, yeah. We had.
So what was she doing then?
Elizabeth was running the retail bank at ANZ. I was actually a Chief Operating Officer for regional and rural banking, and it was always, the funny thing was, where does the metro, regional and rural boundary sort of move? So what was Elizabeth's business? And I think Alison Watkins was actually CEO of regional banking at that time. So many great stories with Elizabeth. Some we'll keep to ourselves, and others we're happy to share.
We won't unpack. She's left the room for that purpose.
Great lady, great mentor.
So look, Cuscal's a big tech shop, and in fact I had the privilege of being in Canberra yesterday. The Parliament, mind you, many people don't get excited about Parliament starting, but I do, because we got a chance to have a meeting with the new minister. So the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services, Stephen Jones. If you don't know him, he's from Wollongong. He's a real down-to-earth person, and his list of things to do is this long. He's got things to do with the ATO. He's got super, which he's already made some announcements about. He's got tiered licensing. For those of you who are in the fintech space, he's got tiered licensing, and we'll drop a note out to you about that conversation, which was pretty interesting. But I asked the hard question, what's your biggest challenge? What surprised you? Because he's been sort of in Canberra for about 2 weeks. He said the challenge is we've got to transform. So, and he said the $1 billion fund that the government's going to do on digital, that's just the start of the ocean. So the challenge for the government is they want to transform. We spoke about payments, we spoke about cancelling cheques, but between now and Christmas, they've got about 50 things they need to get through. We spoke about payment initiation in CDR. He's got a lot of things to do. But the biggest thing he spoke about is he's got to transform people across the business in terms of project management, some of the things you spoke about, but also just getting the agencies to talk to each other. So I think if my takeout from yesterday is he knows what he needs to do. He's very much listening to us and all the stakeholders that have been to him, but he's got a heavy task around just execution, which is some of the things you spoke about. So look, you've done the banking bit, you've done the consulting bit, you're now As You Pay, which is one of our great clients. You've seen different sort of leadership strategies across that space, and I presume back in the banking days it was very much command and control. And for ourselves in Cuscal, we're sort of in Sydney, but a bit remote. We're very much remote. So the sort of leadership styles you're seeing nowadays, what are the key takeouts for people?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's situational leadership. So what's the right leadership for the right situation? And we in the kind of fintech world, it's often is it just the tech-based world? Is it the Elon Musk style? Is it the Steve Jobs? Back in the days, was it the Kerry Packer style? Was that right? Was it wrong? Is it now this sort of great collaboration and consensus style where everyone agrees and we all have self-managed work teams? And I think I would say take it away from the people and make it about the decision-making system. So at some point a decision has to be made, and I with my teams, I would let a conversation go longer than I was feeling. I was feeling a bit frustrated, and this is just going in all these different views. But you realise that somewhere in that a pearl of wisdom can drop. So the danger is with too fast command and control, you actually don't let the discussion permeate enough to get that. But then there has to be a point where, and people use kind of phrase, look, on balance, thank you for all your input. We need to make a decision to move on. If I'm in charge of the leadership responsibility, I've taken on that feedback. I trust you'll respect all the feedback, and we need to make a decision and move on. The worst thing is sort of just this ambiguous decision-making framework or just lack of decision-making. Honestly, you're better to make a decision and get it wrong and quickly realise that than to spend another 6 months trying to figure out to get the right decision. So I think there's this balance of leadership. Yeah, you're in a position of kind of leadership or responsibility to sort of, chart the waters, chart the ship and move it along. But you'd be foolish not to sort of get counsel quickly and widely to inform a better decision. But importantly, agree what that decision-making process is and the time frames you would want to put at that. And that, again, will be relative to the priority.
So it's the old fail fast.
Yeah.
Safely fail fast.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a couple of questions here, and we will have the mics out in the audience, so please get your questions ready. Another one around estimation. So obviously we talk about fail fast, and the old days of the waterfall project are sort of very literally gone, and you sort of, you get your funding for the next round and off you go. But estimation is still important because otherwise you end up in the wrong spot. You get the costings wrong. How much time, like in your business, you're sort of 3 years into the market, how much do you spend versus how accurate does this have to be in terms of the delivery and your client's experience, or do you sort of wing it a bit?
Launching, like we launched real-time payments, so I could ask you how many customers will take up Pay 2 in the next 12 months? I'll be just write down your answer, let me know, that'd be quite helpful actually. We have to make some logical estimations of what we kind of think are happening in customer adoption of new technology. So like I think there are some trusted principles of adoption curves which seem to still work. So if you've got nothing, you're better to come with some logic of rationale of adoption curves around how what's going to be likely take up on these type of products. Agile's interesting. I mean, I know a few large organisations sort of tried the concept that will have multifunctional sort of just these constantly rolling project teams. It's been sort of partly successful, I would say, and I think that's because it's been so long of people just being used to having such a well-defined program of work just to execute on that. And your organisation needs to be ready. As I said, I've talked about before, your ability in that sort of shifting the carriage out of the train, right? Your ability to really shift and pivot. So if you've got an idea and this sort of fail fast and be able to move and pivot quickly, right? It's still on strategy, but hey, that hasn't worked and I need to pivot and do that. I always just say, it's a good comment you raise about sort of fail fast, right? Because I've yet to see many organisations where I'm the project manager that's had the most failed projects. Now, compliments to you for giving it a go and testing stuff perhaps where others feared to tread. But you want to make sure you've got a good level of organisational support around that, right? So you are our exploratory person. So we actually think 8 out of 10 of your projects won't fly, but geez, those 2 will probably be great. Other ones, and again, it's situational, right? Other projects, the tolerance for failure is not great, right? So that can't go wrong. And I think in our world of payments, right? A lot of us got to call it oxygen, right? When it's all kind of working, it's great. Take the oxygen away, and everybody knows. So some things are really important. You just got to get that right. The organisational system has to have an ability to flex and be agile.
Yeah,
for it to work.
I can see Chris Jewell from Zepto nodding his head. Is that fair? Fair call. What about? We spoke this morning about AI and new technologies, and I think you've done a bit in that space. Talk to us about that. And, the nuance of an AI project.
Yeah, look, I mean, the banks were sort of probably some of the early movers on robotics, process automation, and really, how many bots could you have? And we've got 3,000 bots in around the world. So we saw a lot of that coming. My experience, from the topics today, it's kind of mind-blowing where this goes. I think there's logical, rational steps where you can program robotics where they're just replicating tasks, which are sort of easier tasks. Getting into decisioning, and we heard some great ideas where you've got robotics trying to make even sensible decisions, let alone saying, ethic and morality-based decisions for a brand of an organisation. Hopefully I'll still be alive when our first cyborg of a steering committee appears, and what will be their rationale for what's a right or wrong decision. I'm actually an investor in a big data company a few years back in Singapore, and just the whole machine learning concept, and they're just constantly in there, they're saying, when will AI reach this level of consciousness that they kind of know what's right? I don't know if you've seen even some of the online bots. They're quite incredible about the questions they can answer. Scary in a way, But don't forget, it's pre-programmed from reference information. So there's always a bias in that programming. I think there is definitely a role. I mean, clearly we've sort of heard it. It's going to happen. I think there needs to be this sort of just a cautious regulatory or framework around, what's the right decision about how The other thing I'd say with what I experienced in robotics, also, if you put a robot or bots into a system, you have to think about the systems, because the robots will do 100 to 1 of the human. So it's the pressure that it puts on the subsequent system. So that's great. I can make a million decisions a minute and throw that back out to the operations team for them to call you up and hang on, the system can't deal with the outputs of the robotics. So you have to think about the interplay of robotics, within that, within the overall system. But look, it's going to happen. do it cautiously, and think about the human aspects. The other thing about robotics, and perhaps going a bit philosophical, is in the human, my sort of sense, intelligent design of humans, there's the concept of the good and the bad, right? The adversity to prosperity, adversity to compassion, right? So you actually can't have good if you don't have bad. So, whether you sort of believe in intelligent design, creation, or that, whatever you think about this, what was actually our human system designed for a level of bad, so that you actually experience good? Because if you think robotics is supposed to make the world perfect, it all works perfect all the time, because the robots don't get it wrong. A, is that boring? But also, where does this concept of yin and yang, good and bad, come from? So, look, I think there's some really interesting sort of philosophical, ethical, moral views about where systems go. But absolutely, you're thinking about where robotics runs through your business.
Yeah, really good point around. You can accelerate stuff, but if the people around it aren't ready to catch and pass back, you fail fast. Questions from the audience? I've got a few more here, and just they got on there, Ed. Just a warning, Ed works for me, so I've got no idea what this question's going to be.
A common thread out of most things that have been discussed today and what you've just spoken about now is all technology. And I hazard a guess that if anyone's transforming their business, technology is a central plank to that. Just in context of the last couple of years with sort of the war for talent with tech people, how have you sort of managed that in your growth stage to still get the outcome and balance those things?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the sort of war for talent, and if you look at it, what's kind of a lot of development was happening in Eastern Europe as well. That's really sort of brought even more pressure back in Australia. What happened with sort of COVID and Indian outsourcing and that whole thing about where is the work actually now being done. So you think about the war for great talent in Australia, you're absolutely right. A couple of things I would suggest. One is, people are choosing ultimately who they want to work for. So people want to be involved in meaningful work for meaningful companies that I think that do meaningful things. And I think so, yes, you can describe, give me the job description and what it does, yeah, but tell me about your culture, tell me about your brand, tell me about your company and what's the kind of work that I'm doing. Most surveys will show that, career progression and good pay and good salary is great, good given, make more money, but equally, there's got to be a level of meaning to it. So the first thing is you're competing for a war of talent in a battle of the brands. So kind of think about what that means by association. The second thing I'd say was the structures of your resourcing. So actually one of the other fintechs, not fintechs, just a tech company that I'm involved in, is around professional services outsourcing or contracting. That's saying, well, if you're smart, you'd be setting up a contingent workforce pool. Now, I know some of the consulting firms already do this to say, look, we don't have jobs on the books, but we'll put you on our books or put you on our organisation as a contingent workforce pool. We'll keep you engaged with what we're doing. So you think about the structure. I mean, I know as you pay, we have full-time, we have part-time, we have contractors, we have outsourced HR, we have outsourced sort of marketing, and they sort of feel part of their team. But I think you'll have a full-time workforce, part-time, contractor, outsourced workforce. Think about your need not to just get talent today, but actually, tomorrow or next 6 months, whatever. Where's that pool of talent? How do you start pre-engaging with that pool of talent to at least say, hey, that job's come up, are you available? Building contingent workforce pools, I think, is definitely a way to go. But that involves you, might not have a sort of job for you right now, but hey, we would love you to have come work for us, and we'd love you to join our contingent workforce and keep you part of the story of what we're doing. And when the opportunity arises, you'll be the first person I call to do that.
What about, thanks Ed, what about remote working? You're a smaller organisation, but in terms of productivity, and everybody wants to work from home, it saves me money, and I'll come into the office when drinks are on or something like that. What about in your space? You're recruiting. Do you say to everybody, yep, we're fully remote, or you do the Tesla thing where you say, we're not going to make the world's best cars by phoning in?
Yeah, look, I would say 90% of As You Pay work remotely. We actually did invest in some shared services offices, and I would say for 3 out of 5 days a week they're empty. And the view was actually, now, we see it was good to sort of bring people back. When people come in and it's all great, isn't it great to be sitting here and seeing people face to face, going, it's a sort of collegiate discussion in here, right? But realising that's maybe 1 or 1 day a week, 2 days a week. I think there's definitely a place for bringing together a level of in-person. I mean, these conferences, everyone sort of goes, isn't it great to be sort of back together, sort of sharing ideas? So I think there's definitely a space for that needs to happen. I think it'd be dangerous sort of to start to dictate how people should work. And I think, again, situational to the business, situational to the organisation. There are clearly places where people need to come and be together to work. But again, understanding, being flexible on that. What I would say, and the shift in this is, in my experience is not, I won't name the bank, right? But I worked for a bank that actually tagged people's entry and exits out of the turnstiles to kind of see what the average productivity was per day, until they realised that some of the worst stats on that were some of the executives, right? No, I was client meetings, work from home, and work from home was like, no, that was a day off. So this sort of shift of, you had to come and sit in the office. Interesting, if you look at, what's happened therefore in the industry and how the world's moving, what's going to happen? What happens in all the CBD real estate space now? What happens to car parking spaces? We're doing some work with a parking company, and they said, actually, we're looking at events management in our car park spaces now, like your events in a car park, because you can park your car and you can have your event on the next level because we cannot sell the next of the floors. Smart idea, right? How do you sort of pivot on that and realise? So I think just being aware that it's a changing world, it's a changing work environment. So the last thing I would say, remote management of a workforce, I think needs even more intense interaction. How you're going questions within there, and that don't assume that because people are working from home, it's all okay. It might even be more chaotic. It's sort of don't assume because you may not see them as often or sort of directly. I reckon dial up the personal interaction with people in a remote workforce to make them feel that they're part of the company and part of the team, even because it's not as obvious as sort of sitting with you every day.
Now, speaking of event management, it's something completely different. You've got a background in the music industry and you play some instruments. Tell us about that. And I presume project management applies to the music industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I did say that I did drop out of uni. My first job, I was a jazz musician for 5 years. To my mum's horror, who was a bank manager, and my dad was an engineer, both musicians themselves, until she decided it was time for me to get a real job and sign me up at the bank. Yeah, look, I've always, for a while I was trying to do the music and the both. I reckon I sort of dropped it for many years and didn't do it until I actually met John McFarlane at CEO, and you might have seen John's a bit of a music nut, loved to play his guitar, and he said, well, you can be good at both. And he did emphasise both. He says not an either or. And, you should absolutely pursue your music because that's your passion, right? But be great at your job and great at your sort of banking work and find the opportunities to combine both. And I thought, well, how do you kind of do that? When you think about creativity, the great thing about music and composition is it's really a time and space stand still. My wife will say, you'll be at that piano for 2 hours. Really? That sort of concept of I'm in a different creative space to where I would be. The other thing, musicians have got a lot to learn from business, right? That most musicians do it from a passion of the art and are pretty terrible at business management for themselves. And so music is a business as well. So I often coach musicians on saying, you're in a business, you're the product. I think some of the greatest analogies I've seen with music and business is the concept of orchestras, where everyone's playing their part, playing their piece. Nobody overplays or underplays. To sort of have a symphony orchestra with the trumpets start going off in their own direction is just not going to work. And I think it's a level where there's actually a respect for your fellow players. I would get most nervous when I was playing in the jazz band if we had a really great player who was playing with us. So I just respect that I would play better. I didn't want to be showing up, and an absolute respect that person was great at what they do. And I think I would sort of say musicians, most people, can you come and play? Mark plays the piano, come and do this. And you think, well, there's actually 10 to 15 years of training before you probably go and publicly play. And by the time you publicly play as a musician, you are what we call unconsciously excellent, right? I'm not thinking where my fingers go for the rest of this 20-minute concerto or piano piece, right? I'm in the zone, I'm in the moment, I'm unconsciously sort of excellent at what I do. And I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about the audience. I'm thinking about the product, the delivery of it, and everything else has to happen unconsciously excellent. Now, that would be a great place for business corporations to be. Reason is, I have absolute trust in the people around me in the band. I even know to the point that if I do fluff up, they'll think that I'm taking it in a different direction, not maybe made a mistake. Right. So some interesting analogies, you sort of pull it out. And then leadership in business, orchestra leadership is great, because the view is that the orchestral conductor or leader is probably one of the most skilled musicians, but never says anything. Their job is to have everyone else shine. So I think there's some really nice sort of music analogies that come from that. I'm talking about sort of finishing off on we're at pinnacles in my career, right? So we decided that we would record these CDs at the bank, and John said, go and book a studio. And so I got invited up to level 31 of the CEO's office. He had a guitar in the corner. Said, play me these songs that you're thinking about recording with us for the bank. And we played these sort of songs, and sitting across, it's just weird, sort of playing guitar across the desk from the CEO. And he said, just got one question. How many of your other songs have the word bank in it? He said, if I wanted a jingle, I would have gone to an agency. I want you to write a song that encapsulates what we're about. This is Elizabeth is back, the old breakout period with ANZ, this big, big cultural transformation, breaking out, being bold, being different, being yourself, bringing your whole self to work. So we ended up, recording these charity CDs, which we gave to a charity organisation, getting John into the studio, and it was all sort of great. And then he said, we're going to do a charity concert. Level 31, we'll invite some of our big customers, we'll set up the band, and we all knew it was an excuse for John to play as well, but that was good. So we had this sort of concert, and I remember sitting there, and I've got the CEO on the side guitar, and we had Kathy Freeman, who was the ambassador for this charity foundation, on the left of me. I think I'm sitting on the top floor of ANZ Bank, playing the Rolling Stones between Kathy Freeman and the CEO. I think I could say my planets have aligned now, and I think I can say...
It's your metaverse.
I've done both. Yeah, it's my metaverse sort of coming together. But look, my son's sort of taken over for me on sort of as a recording artist now. It's great. I know when I'm not doing enough, because I think it's that balance of what you're learning, and then you're right, there are many great concepts I think we can learn from the cross industries. Not only, the industries, but the mindset that people in that industry bring to a particular situation or a problem. And as I say, music is often around, they will forego the money for the passion of playing to a degree because they love it so much, is they just enjoy that, versus other stuff.
It's great insight. I think we all have I'll talk about boats another time. Now, just before I get James back up, one last question for you. You've got a few government clients. How do they go about projects? Do you feel like you're...
So is any hint?
I don't think there's any... Well, see how you go.
Oh, look, government, has to be very considerate of its change. One thing is you're making big decisions with the big impacts, right? So I get that. And the second is there's an element of procurement fairness, right? So we have to go to RFPs and RFTs, and we have to sort of make sure that we've sourced the right, large organisations tend to move down that level of procurement fairness. Interestingly, I think it's shifting a bit. I'm hearing and participating in more conversations around, not agile, but I would say innovation tanks within the business units themselves. I mean, their challenge is they might have a Department of Treasury, but then they've got all these agencies that are operating in their own, and they have to, to actually sell a product, you have to convince the agency, even though it's run by Treasury. And then in the fintech space, in the banking space, it's all it's regulated under a banking contract. So we actually they have to go to the banks and ask whether they can do this on the banking contract. If you can't do that, we then can go to a fintech and do it. It'd be better if you partner with a bank and delivered it, because if it goes to the fintech, we have to write a scope of a new RFP and throw it out to all the fintechs to do it. So again, to my thing about procurement and how you get procured in government, understand the process, understand the people. But I would say there is definitely an appetite to change, right, to get things done faster and more agile. But I think that's taking a bit of time to move through.
Yeah. And
it's a big engine. Yeah.
Federal or state, they're all in the same boat.
Go Victor Dominel. I mean, keep pushing. You get out there.
Well, thank you very much. That was
thank you all.
Fantastic presentation. James, you look ready to go, and we stand between you and lunch, so we better get off.
I'll hold you up for that.
So I'll just talk for about 25 minutes. No, thank you very much. Please thank Mark and Kerry.
Thank you all.
It is lunch now. Next door. Don't forget, if you want to tweet and Insta and LinkedIn, etc., the hashtag Curious Thinkers 2022. We want to thank Visa, the sponsor, again, but go and chow down. Dagwood dogs outside.